In this video, I'm going to share with you online facilitation skills from the real world, stuff that works, stuff I've used that's going to really help to make your online workshops brilliant. I'm going to share with you examples and real world practice from the sessions I've run that work for whatever kind of workshop you're trying to run. We're going to talk about how online differs from in-person events and how it doesn't differ. How many things are exactly the same, and it's about good facilitation. By the end of this video, you will have a whole bunch of tools, tips and techniques that you can use to make your sessions fantastic and do a great job of your online facilitating. So we're going to talk about online facilitation skills today, and I think the first thing to say about running sessions online is a lot of it's exactly the same as running in-person workshops from a facilitator's perspective. You need to be focusing on being a good facilitator in the session first and foremost. What does that mean? Well, that means sticking to the 4 golden rules. We'll talk about that in a moment, and it means ensuring you are managing that session really well. And of course, it all starts with the preparation and making sure that you've got a really good agenda, really clear aims, and that your participants know why they're there. So I'm going to set some of that out for you right now, and then we'll talk about some of the tricks to getting those quieter participants involved, and indeed how to manage some of those more vocal contributors that we've all experienced. Like all meetings and workshops, it's really important to be clear about your aims for the session. This really helps you to focus your agenda to make sure you're making progress towards the outcome, so that your client or sponsor's happy with that we've made some progress and indeed the team have moved on. Importantly, that the participants also understand why they're there. Workshop skeptics, and we've all had a few in our sessions, I'm sure, are the most easy way, if you like, to win them over is to be clear about why we're here. What contribution are we expecting and what is it we're trying to get to today? So get clear on the aim or aims, and we will often do that working with our clients by taking them through a bit of a process to asking them what we're there to do, but then just really helping them to think clearly about what is it that you really want out of it, what can be expected in the time that you have available. In that same discussion, I would also want to be talking to the client or the sponsor about the participants that they're expecting to come to the session. What I would love to know is, are there any difficult participants, people that I need to watch out for, or difficult relationships? Have we got some clients that we know, some of the participants that we know don't get on that well? Useful to know that in advance. But I also want to know maybe something about their job role and what they're likely to be able to bring to that session. And that helps me to prepare so I can bring in people, particularly if they're a bit quieter and I want to hear their point of view. It's nice to know when and where I should be expecting people to get involved in that session. So once you're clear on the aim, then the next part that we get involved with is developing the detailed agenda. So this obviously is dependent on the time you have available for your session. And a note on that, by the way, the common view that I hear about on lots of YouTube videos and read about is that online workshops should be shorter than in-person workshops. I'm not sure I agree. I think all workshops should be as short as they can be. But I think online, as long as you give breaks and as long as you manage the session well, I've run all day sessions many times and the participants have given great feedback and had a fantastic day. So whilst Zoom fatigue is a real thing, people sitting in front of their desks all day is hard work, you can build in enough breaks into your session, and importantly, in your detailed agenda, ensure that there's enough variety in your sessions. So if you're running a post-it session using an online whiteboard, then you might follow that with something completely different, perhaps as a presentation and discussion, perhaps as a Q&A session, or maybe a voting session, something that's just different all the time. And when designing a detailed agenda, I'm not only thinking about how I move the group through a journey, a discovery to the aims, I'm also thinking about how that feels as a journey for the participants, so that it tries to keep as many people interested for as much of the time as possible. So once you've got a detailed agenda, Then it's time to prepare the participant agenda, the one that you're going to send out to them in advance. Now, it's really important here that they understand the aim of the session, so I would typically start with a short sentence or paragraph explaining what we're trying to get out of that session. The reason for that is that I want the participants to be able to prepare their thoughts if they want to. That's for the more introvert thinkers. They do tend to, the introvert thinking type tends to want more time to reflect on things and consider their view. So let's help them do that. So giving a short description really works to do that. And then I will have the timings of breaks. I tend not to put the timing of the sessions into a participant facing agenda, and that's really because I might want to change things up as we're going through the session. Now, if I've got a really important session to run, then I might suggest speaking to each of the participants prior to the session. I just did this recently with a board strategy session. We had 15 people in that. It was a half-day session, and I had a half-hour call with each of them to talk to them about what we were trying to achieve and to get their views, their thoughts on that. So I'm building in their buy-in, if you like, to the agenda. And then I'm also interested in advice from them. I asked all of them, what advice would you give me? They knew their group. I did not know them. I hadn't worked with them before. So it was really helpful to get their steer on that. And the important thing here is I'm getting their buy-in to that agenda. That helps enormously on the day with no surprises. So they all know what we're here to do. They all know how it's going to work. And you don't have that really awkward moment where somebody says, hang on, why are we doing this session? I've had to deal with that live a couple of times in my real world examples. Perhaps I'll share with you more about how I handled those, but that's one of the most challenging things that can happen to a facilitator, is to have your agenda questioned at the outset. So if you've got the time and if it's important enough to do, then have a chat with those participants in advance, take them through. It will make you feel more comfortable and more clear as well. One step further than a conversation with participants is researching them. Now, if you want to ensure people are making a contribution, you can find out who's coming, get onto their LinkedIn profile, look them up on Twitter, have a look at their company website and see if you can find them on there. I guarantee that for everybody you can find online, there will be something you can use to draw them into that session. Whether that's a previous job or current job experience on LinkedIn, it might be a post they've made on Twitter, it might be something their company's doing. I've recently ran some round table sessions online. So these are sort of intensive hour-and-a-half conversations with about 12 people. For those, I spent a day and a half to 2 days researching the people coming and making sure I had lots of content on them that I could draw them in. I could use that to get them into the session, get them participating. So really well worth doing, and really helps you on the day make sure that you can bring people in and shows you've done your homework, which of course looks great, and is really helpful to making their relationship with you feel better, that you've bothered to spend the time getting to know them. Online workshops are best done around an online whiteboard. There's not many workshops I can imagine online where you wouldn't benefit from having some online whiteboard. We use Mural quite a lot. There are others, Miro, Zoom have one, Google has one. But for Mural, what I will do in advance of the session is set up that whiteboard with the session instructions. So if I've got, say, 5 sessions to run, I'll have the numbers 1 to 5. I have some brief outline explanation notes on the whiteboard for the participants, and any frameworks or templates I want. So if that's a 2x2 Boston matrix for prioritizing, perhaps it's as simple as putting some coloured post-it notes up with names on them so that we know which participants are using which colour post-it notes. You can use a variety of things, and we can share some of those with you in later videos. The key reason for setting up your whiteboard is twofold. Firstly, it saves you a bunch of time in the session. So you don't want to be spending a great deal of time, do you, wasting your participants' time with stuff that you could have done in advance. But the number one, and this is true of an in-person workshop, if they walk into that room or they arrive on that online whiteboard and see a whole bunch of preparation has been done, people then comply more easily with what you're asking them to do. They can see where the progress is, they can see that this has been thought about, they can see you have a plan, and they're much more likely to follow you through that session and do what you want them to do in the session, contribute in the ways that you're hoping they will. So get your preparation done in the whiteboard, and then you can invite them in days before if you want to, and get people looking at it and thinking about their contribution. Or maybe I typically do an hour before so that they have a chance to have a look round, but I don't want them to spend hours and feel that they've got to sort of do all the thinking ahead of the workshop. After all, that's what we're doing in the workshop, isn't it? So managing the online facilitation session is a lot like running any other session that you'll do in person, only you're sitting down typically, which actually makes a bigger difference than you might imagine. I find projecting the energy into a camera is much harder to do than in a room. Perhaps that's nerves. In a room it feels a bit more nerve-wracking, doesn't it? You're standing in front of people, but you can look people in the eye, look around the room, and I think a sort of natural energy projection comes from some of that. So when I'm running an online session, I will stare directly into the camera, as I'm doing now, and that feels really awkward initially because you're looking at a screen full of faces on your Zoom screen, and there's all these faces and you're not looking at any of them. You're looking above them into the camera. But of course the big advantage is you're actually looking each of them in the eye from their perspective. So, you know, the quid pro quo of it, if you like, is it feels weird for you, but for all of them it looks like you're looking straight out of their screen at them. As I'm running any online session, I always have at least 2 screens. My setup here is with 3 screens. We've got a video coming on the setups that we use for our online sessions. I don't think you can run an online workshop as a facilitator without at least 2 screens. And that is one for the content, so that might be a whiteboard, it might be a PowerPoint presentation, and one so that you can see all of your participants' faces, so you can have at least some attempt at trying to read their energy levels and their interest and their enthusiasm. So 2 is a minimum. 3 is really good because then you can typically have another screen for messaging apps or anything else you want to do to keep in touch with people in the session. So 2 or 3 screens, really key for running a great online session. So as I'm getting going on my online session, I make sure I'm there a few minutes early, and I will normally ask the client or sponsor to do their introduction. And I really just want here to establish that it's their workshop and that they should set their aims to their team. I'm there to facilitate. I'm not there to kind of own their ultimate outcome. I'm there to help them achieve that, but they need to establish that their aim with their team. So I would always get the client, after I've welcomed everybody, I get the client to then do a few minutes on what we're here to do, and welcoming everybody and telling them how excited they are about this session. Also, if you want to do an icebreaker, then this is the time to do it, straight after the client's introduction or sponsor's introduction. Now, thinking about icebreakers with online icebreakers, there are fewer options available to you than in person, but we've got some great ones, and you can see our other videos on how to do those. But think about whether you need one. So I normally introduce my conferences I run by saying I don't like icebreakers, and in fact I say to people, if you contribute and get involved, I won't make you do an icebreaker. So I'm not a big fan of icebreakers for their own sake. There's 2 reasons I would use them for online sessions. One is if the group genuinely don't know each other and I want to use some sort of introduction. There's lots of good ones that can work to do that. And secondly, I might use an icebreaker if I need to introduce a different mindset. So if we're visioning, potentially looking ahead to the future, thinking about the strategy, then I might want people to start thinking a little differently, and signalling that through an online icebreaker is sometimes worth doing. But you don't need to, don't assume that you definitely have to do one. So after the icebreaker, I want to set the rules for the session. So my rules, and this is going counter to everything that anybody does online, and everything I see and read says use the hands up function if you want to come in. I think that ruins a workshop. I think it's great for a meeting in most cases where you want a bit more order and a little bit more management and governance of that session. But a workshop, I want people to interrupt. I want a flow of conversation. I want the conversation to follow with the participants where they want to take it. And there's pretty much not many tools that will stop that as much as the hands up function, where you've got this kind of delay if someone comes in later. How many times have you been in sessions? Oh, my point was about something 3 points ago. What I say to participants is come in whenever you want to. And then my job as a facilitator, if 2 or 3 people are talking at once, Then I facilitate and I say, okay, let's get Amy to speak first, and then we'll come to Jackie, and then we'll come to Paul. That's how I would manage that situation, and you get a much better flowing conversation. It's very rare that I've experienced a workshop where too many people are talking at once. Here I'm talking about numbers up to about 25, 30 people. That's probably the largest online sessions I would use that with. I wouldn't have 30 people in one discussion with open mics, but it's worked really well up to that point. And I do encourage people in the rules, keep yourself on mute. That obviously helps the whole thing flow, helps me see when people come off mute that they want to talk as well, which is useful. And I have two other rules. One is cameras on. So it's really key, as we've talked about already, reading the room in an online session is the hardest thing that you lose. I think it's the biggest thing you lose as a facilitator, is really that energy, seeing who's sort of slumped in their seats, not interested. Reading that room is really tough, so cameras on is really important. And the third rule is to ask your participants to use just one messaging platform. So if you're using a whiteboard, ask them to put post-it notes and questions onto the whiteboard so everyone can see them there. It's really tough to keep up when you've got potentially people talking to you, putting post-its up and putting messages into the chat that's on the Zoom chat or the Teams chat. So try and avoid people using that. As you know, people will bend the rules all the time, and that's kind of fine, but it's very difficult as a facilitator to keep your eye on two different messaging platforms and pay any attention to the people as they're speaking. After you've done the rules, then it's your time to introduce the first session. Now this is where you will probably be about as nervous as you're ever going to be. So give clarity around that first session. Make sure that it's crystal clear what you're asking people to do. Don't make the first session too complicated, and then get out of the way. So once you've set that discussion, whether it's a discussion question you want people to in small groups in a breakout, or maybe you want post-it notes on the whiteboard around a particular problem or ideas or whatever your session's about, set it really clearly, give them a bit of a time frame for it, and then get out the way so that they can get on with it. Don't do any more questions, because then you can get drawn into the session immediately by people asking, so what kind of detail do you think we need here, Kieran? You don't want questions like that at this stage, because that gets you answering the content questions. You want them to answer that. So set the question and then get out of the way. And your job as you're facilitating any online session, indeed any session, is to keep your eye on the participants. So much harder to do via a screen, but you want to watch them. What are their energy levels like? Are they getting involved? Do they look interested, or are they wandering off doing other things? Just try and get a gauge on how your participants are engaging with that session. And you can do that all the time throughout the session, and that's why I always have at least 2 screens, 3 screens for me, so I can always see their faces and keep my watchful eye on what's going on. All sessions, particularly online sessions, there will be people that aren't contributing. And I guess on online sessions it's slightly easier to be a passenger, as you might call it, in a session, be quieter. I've got a few tips and tricks for how you can draw people into the conversation. So firstly, ask them directly. So you can call someone out, you can say, Amy, what's your thoughts on this point? Now there's a little trick to how to do that well. Firstly, if it's a longer question you want to pose, so you might say, we've been talking about these 3 or 4 points, and I'd love to know what you think about them, Amy. Or you do it this way, which is the correct way. Amy, I'm going to come to you with a question. We've been talking about these 3 or 4 points, and I'd love to get your perspective on which one of those is the most important. All I've done is signal to Amy at the beginning of that question that I'm coming to her, gives her a chance to have a think about it, and not have that embarrassing moment for all of us where she's like, sorry, I was on mute, or whatever else you might say, they weren't paying attention. So put their name first. I ran a conference for 800 people one time, and it was a sort of a military for the Ministry of Defence, and one of the presenters, this 2-star general, was on the stage talking. He walked out into the audience while he was talking, just casually walked out, and then he stopped and said, what do you think about that, to this guy sat in the audience who was on his phone. Incredibly, the guy on his phone was taking notes and actually was able to give a pretty cogent and coherent response. But do you know, everyone sat up in their seats after that and paid attention. So I don't think I'm quite brave enough to do that, but it's a trick to certainly think about. Some other ways to get the quieter people engaged. So you can ask people to put post-it notes on the whiteboard with their views on something. If you've set it up in advance with each person having a different coloured post-it note, then you can easily see that people are contributing, and they know that you can see, so you tend to get contributions from everybody. So that's a way of drawing in people that aren't happily sort of putting their hand up or interrupting, as we more importantly would like them to. So you can ask them to do that. There is a session called a pyramid brainstorm, which we might talk about in more detail in another video, but basically that's about saying to people, write 3 post-it notes on your own of your thoughts about this point, then get together in a small group, 2 or 3 of you, and work out what are the top 3 from your group, and then you can keep doing that, and you can have, put people into larger and larger groups. And another way of getting people involved and getting people into the conversation, I've got a question. I call it forcing a response, and basically I would ask, give a score out of 10 for how good, how bad, how far we've come, whatever. It doesn't matter what the question is. Get them to answer in a number out of 10. You can get them to write it on a post-it. You can get everybody to write an individual one, or you can get small groups to answer the question, and someone comes back with 7. Now you've got a why question to go into. So immediately you've got a conversation to have about why. Just asking the general question of how are we progressing will tend to keep the quiet people quiet. The more vocal people will happily come and tell you how we've progressed brilliantly or terribly or whatever the answer is. This way of forcing a response through a question, through a number, forces everyone to have an opinion, and you can then use that to have a great conversation, facilitate a wonderful discussions. But it's important to remember not everyone is there to contribute and lead and to be as involved. It is quite fine and legitimate to have people in your workshop who are there to listen, to understand, so that they can then perform later in the team or understand the strategic direction or whatever the subject of your session is. So all of that is perfectly fine. Not everybody needs to be contributing all the time. So online sessions that you can use that definitely work every time. I'm going to give you a quick list now, and then we've got videos on how to do all of these in a bit more detail. Only short videos, and how to run these in person or online. Suggestion 1, a timeline, so a project plan, milestone planning. Also a workflow, same thing really. It's just then you're talking about business processes running through, what happens then, and then what happens after that, and what happens after that. And indeed customer journeys, so what happens to the customer when they first land on your website, where do they go next, then what happens, etc. All of those work brilliantly with an online whiteboard and an online session. You can run them for up to 20 or 30 people, and you can break that out, give people chunks to do in small breakout groups. Really good. I've used it hundreds of times and it works brilliantly online, and in person. Online post-its, now the whiteboards that are great, I love using them. Doing the post-it session where you get ideas, the problems, the challenges, what we should be doing next. Get people to put their post-its on the whiteboard, and then you have a conversation with everyone about grouping those post-its. So you can just call out any post-it and say, here's one, what's this all about? Did anyone else have one similar to that? And then you start to group those post-its together on that whiteboard, and then you can vote on those afterwards as well to prioritize and decide which ones of those are the ones you want to take forward. Really, really good online. Works, in fact, arguably works better online than in person. Partly because in online you can change the colour of a post-it note without having to rewrite it. You can change the shape of the post-it note and the type of post-it note. Brilliant. It works fantastically, and I just wish somehow you could do that in real life. Online voting is a great way of engaging everyone really quickly, really simply, and it helps you prioritize very rapidly to know what it is you want to focus the discussion on afterwards. So you can set these up in a matter of seconds using Mural, and same in Miro, and you can give people a set number of votes and let them vote for the most important or high priority or whatever points you want to make about the voting. Really simple, quick session that you can run around any subject. So online voting gets a big thumbs up from me. RACI sessions. So RACI stands for responsible, accountable, consulted and informed. And let me just help a little bit here with, it should be RC. Accountable is the top of the tree. Responsible is the person doing the thing. Consulted is someone that needs to be asked a question or involved in some way in deciding, and informed, they just need to know the answer or what's happening. So a RACI session is a really useful way of getting clarity with a team on a project or workflow, and it works really well online. You can use the online whiteboard to load your tasks or your workflow that you're using for your RACI. You can then ask people to grab some post-its, work in small groups, and go through those tasks, working out who's accountable, who should be responsible, and who needs to be consulted and informed. So a really good session, and works really well because in person it's quite a detailed thing to do, but it works really well around a detailed workshop session online where they can access the documents that they need to in their own screen at home. So RACI sessions are really good. A fishbone. Well, now we use fishbones online and in person. This is where you will typically have a large picture of a fish skeleton. So in the fish's head you write your problem statement or your aim, and then for each of those kind of bones down the back you would have big subject headings for the things you need to think about. So if your vision was to transform your organization digitally, then there might be one of the structures there will be legacy systems, one of the other ones might be the people training needs, and all of your thoughts and ideas can be grouped together around those kind of bones, and you can have little tinier bones coming off them with more issues. We've got a whole video on how to do a fishbone exercise. It works brilliantly online, so definitely you can use that if you're looking to explore issues or thinking about vision and where your organization's heading. A lessons learned session works much better online than I've ever been able to do it in person. And I think the reason is that you can load your whiteboard, your online whiteboard, with the documents, examples, etc. that you want to talk about. So you might have example email templates. You might want to have up there your project plan. You can have these things visually there that people can then talk around, slap post-it notes on top of, and really get into the detail of what went well and what didn't. These are just a few examples of things that I've used in the real world online, and they work brilliantly. There's hundreds more, and I'd love to hear yours, but we've got heaps more in our videos, so do subscribe and give this video a like if you like it. It really helps us out. And there's lots more content that we can share with you. Good facilitation is good facilitation whether it's online or in person. Most of it is exactly the same. There are different techniques and there's more challenging things to think about when you're working online, but there's challenging things to do in person as well when you're on your feet in front of a group with no hiding place, and it's much harder to look at notes when you're live in front of people, isn't it? We have 4 golden rules of facilitation, and these apply online or in person. Number 1, remain neutral. So you need to not have a view on whether or not this is more important than that, or whether or not the company should go that way instead of this way, or any number of those kind of points. Your job as a facilitator is to get your group, your participants, to decide that. So you need to keep out of that. It's quite tough to do all the time. You need to try and remain agnostic about what the right answer is. And that leads to golden rule number 2, which is that you need to focus on the process, not the content. The minute you get into the content, you can end up in defending a position when you're supposed to be facilitating a group. So your role as a facilitator is to make sure the group is progressing. It doesn't matter whether you think that's more important or more interesting. What matters is whether the group do. And so your role is to constantly be thinking about how are your participants contributing? How are we progressing? In this session, are we moving towards where we need to go? Are we reaching some sort of agreement or indeed a priority? That's your role all the time, is to focus on the process, not coming up with a great idea and saying that's a brilliant idea, let's stop now because we've got the answer. That's the kind of worst facilitation practice that you can be in. And indeed, one of the reasons that we recommend that C-suite board members don't try and facilitate their own sessions, because it's really difficult to facilitate something that you have a passionate view about what the right answer is. Golden rule number 3, the group is the expert. So this will really help you as a facilitator, but it's really important to remember, as we all know, is that the participants will have way more knowledge than you do about the subject. This is particularly true if you're a consultant facilitator like I am, where you might be asked to run sessions in any industry on any subject. Who knew that I was going to become the world-leading expert on Campylobacter in chickens for having run a 3-day international conference with the world's best academics in the subject? Not me, I didn't know that, that's for sure. Golden rule number 4, don't do anything the group can do for itself. So this is, in its most simple way, grouping post-its. When you're on an online workshop and you're grouping them on an online whiteboard, or whether you're in person and you're grouping them on a real whiteboard, a real wall, the group should do that. If you can get them on their feet or just dragging the post-its around on your online whiteboard, they can participate more. If they're visual learners, then they'll find that really helpful as they're moving post-its around. That will help them assimilate some of that information as well. And it's more powerful to get their buy-in to the session. There was a fantastic experiment I really like, conducted by a guy called Daniel Kahneman. He had a group of people where he asked half the group to write their own lottery ticket numbers, and the other half of the group he gave a lucky dip, so he chose the numbers for them. And then before the draw, he asked to buy them back. He said, I want to buy back your lottery tickets, and he asked them how much they wanted for it. And the group that created their own wanted a couple of dollars more every time than the group that had the lucky dip. As we know, the odds are identical. Those lottery tickets are worth the same, but not to them, because they felt that they had some contribution to creating them. So there's a great little story to help remember that if you get the group doing things for themselves, then they're more likely to feel engaged, they're more likely to own the outcome, and more likely to have a better session. So never do anything for the group that they can do themselves. It's worth remembering that there are some real positives to running an online workshop as opposed to an in-person workshop. The one I think has most surprised me, is that it works better for the more introverted personality types. Those people that want a bit more time to think and consider their opinion, so that introverted thinking, as well as what we more commonly think of as introverts, which are the quieter, less likely to want to talk in front of people. You can use the online session to draw those people in where they want to, but also to give them the time. They can read around the subject live. They can be looking at their other screen and finding out facts and further information if that's going to help them in their thinking through the workshop. So I think that's one of the really key benefits of online. I've touched on the second benefit, which is that you can research other things at the time, can't you? I love being in online meetings where you can Google something that someone just said and just quickly go, oh, okay, I get it. Whereas it's pretty tough to do that, isn't it, in an in-person meeting or workshop? So that works really well. So we've covered a few things about online facilitation skills in this short video. I think the headlines are, you need to prepare really well, possibly more so than an in-person event, because it's easier for participants to disengage. So remember that. Secondly, in the session, make sure you're keeping a really good eye on those cameras so that you can see who's engaging and who's not. Use an online whiteboard of some sort, because that will help you coordinate all of the responses and get people involved. And we've talked also about how we get some of the quieter individuals contributing and participating in the session. So some really useful tips and tools in there, I hope that you found useful. And finally, we've given you a whistle-stop tour of some of the sessions which have been used in the real world many times over by me and some of my colleagues that work every time online. We're going to cover more videos on those and show you how they work in person as well as online. So good luck with your online session. Let us know how it goes, and if you want any advice or thoughts, we'd be delighted to respond to you in your comments. Please subscribe if you're interested in this content, and if you did like this video, please give us a thumbs up. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm.